Do you ever think about specific moments in your life? Those points in your life that seemed like a crossroad of possibilities. A place where there was an intersection upon which different paths could have been taken. And you chose one because you had to. And yet, days, months, years later, you can't help but find yourself returning to that moment over and over and over again in your head and playing out all the possibilities of what could have been. The stories that your life could have told but didn't. For me, one of the earliest of those moments is small and quiet, and yet, in many ways, it feels like it was the most profound. I'm 14 years old, sitting in my pediatrician's patient room. Those nondescript doctor's offices that most of us have all been in, where you sit on that uncomfortable as hell tissue paper with nothing to look at but strange pamphlets on the walls covered in the faces of smiling stock photos of white people and that one black person that are all about colon care or diabetes, that as a young kid, they are literally the world's most boring reads ever. And also, there's that really cool 3D model bus that's like sitting on that like half shelf in there that shows the inside of a human being, and you can see all the guts and stuff, and you're not entirely sure you're allowed to touch it, but boy, do you want to. It's a cold, sterile, and yet familiar room for many of us, I'm sure. Even at my young age, it was a familiar room, a room that I had been in, or at least similar ones to it, many times before. But this time, it's different. It's the first time that I've ever been alone in this room. You see, every time that I had been in this room at my pediatrician's before, my mother had come with me, sitting in that tiny little chair next to the fish market wrap bench that I had to sit on. I was jealous of her. But now, however, I had been trusted to walk the 5 blocks to the office by myself for my yearly physical. So here I was alone, taken back to the room by the nurse and told to wait for Dr. Jane, a kindly Indian man that I'd been seeing for years who was often a little bit too harsh about my need to lose weight, but he meant well. And while I waited, I had been given a clipboard with a survey to fill out with a half-filled pen that you had to suck on the end of to get any ink to come out of. And so I began to fill out the survey because I sure as hell didn't want to read those brochures. And it had all those normal questions for kids my age that you would expect on a sheet like that. How old are you? Have you ever had any alcohol? Have you ever had any of the following? Rashes, itchy eyes, extreme gas? I remember laughing at that one. And okay, yes, I still laugh at it today, even as an adult when I see it on a sheet like that. But going through this survey, on the last page, there was this big checklist that asked me to check anything that I wanted to ask the doctor about. And again, this was mostly normal stuff that you would see there, like stuff about sex, pregnancy, alcohol, drugs, all the cool stuff that the kids are into. And I scanned through it, not expecting to check anything. I was 14. I knew this stuff, And as I scanned down, I saw it. I saw one of those check boxes. Next to the checkbox, it said, transsexual gender issues. Just seeing that, with my pen hovering over that checkbox, was one of the most terrifying moments of my life, at least up to that point. Not because I didn't know what transsexual was, but because I knew what it was all too well. Since I was a young kid, I had felt like I had something wrong with me, something wrong inside of me. For most of my early years, girls and boys weren't really different, weren't seen as different. But once I got to preschool, I began to notice the change, the differences. How girls and boys began to be treated differently, seen differently, dressed differently, told to act differently. And as I looked at the girls in my class, I couldn't help but feel like that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to have the chance to be like them, be with them, be treated like them, exist in the world like them, with them. And with each passing year, as I got older and older, the gulf between our worlds seemed to get wider and wider. And this feeling of wrongness continued to grow. In fact, with each passing day, it grew. Yet, as it grew, it began to morph into something new. Not just wrongness, but a pain. A conscious pain. A hungry pain that was always ready for more, growing bigger as the gulf between who I was on the outside and who I was inside continued to widen. And yet, it felt like there was nothing I could do to stop it. I just knew somehow implicitly that to ever say anything about it, to say that I felt like I was a girl, well, that was wrong. I was a boy. I was supposed to be strong and tough and not talk about those silly inside feelings. Not only would it be weird to say that you wanted to be a girl, but to even express pain, even that simple thing, nothing worse than that. And I already wasn't exactly seen as the tough guy. I mean, I was honestly the most picked on kid in class, or at least one of the most. I had few, if any, close friends. The few friends that I did have, I remember the story of them having a birthday party and expressly didn't tell me or talk about it around me because they didn't want me to feel bad that I wasn't invited. And I found out that it happened anyways, and it didn't feel great. It made me feel really lonely, honestly. I got bullied regularly too, made fun of for my new glasses, my braces, my weight, my nerdiness, and penchant for bringing in Star Trek novels to school to read. How could I ever express anything like the feeling that I was a girl in the face of all that? Did I want to be more ostracized? I was already so lonely. Did I want to become lonelier? And yet this pain inside of me already made me feel isolated and alone because it felt like I had no one else that felt it. It was just mine. That pain was mine. No, it was a monster. A conscious monster. A monster that I would call today gender dysphoria, but back then I just knew as the monster. I just kept growing inside the cage that was my body. I thought about it all day. I had to fight it every day to push it down. And it began to talk to me. It told me, if I ever told anyone about it, that they would reject me. They would see me as the monster and push me away. That was wrong. That I was wrong and strange and weird. And the monster said it was making me that way, that it was making me into it. And all I could do was just exist with it and let it control me. That's what it said anyways. So I knew, before it got too strong, that I needed to do something. I needed to fight back. So late at night, with my parents safely asleep, I would sneak downstairs to the computer room and start Googling. The internet is a fun place, especially back then. And for the first time, I learned that my feelings, that monster, wasn't solely my own. I found websites where people expressed the same feelings, had the same battle with the same monster. And I found one of the best sites in the world at that time, one by a computer scientist and trans activist Lynn Conway, who, by the way, Lynn, if you ever hear about this video, thank you so much for that site. You have no idea how much it meant to me. It was a mostly boring black text on a white background website with a few pictures that dominated the early 2000s, but it meant so much to me. It was amazing. It explored and answered so many questions a young kid could have, but it also had pictures of trans folks throughout history, girls who had been born like me, and they looked amazing, beautiful, exactly like how I wanted to be. And for the first time, I knew I was part of a history and a community. I wasn't alone. I felt more community on that site by myself reading it at 1 a.m. than I had ever felt in my life before. Yet I was still hiding in the dark of night by myself. But at least I knew that my monster was not a unique one. In fact, the site also gave me ways to think about fighting the monster, but it also warned that the monster was about to get stronger. It had this ability, you see, something called puberty. That's where the monster got its biggest strength. During puberty, this monster would finally escape the internal cage of my body and finally make itself known externally in the worst way. My body, as the monster had always told me, would change and morph and twist to its desires, not my own. Yet, the site also mentioned that there was a way out. At the time, that was hormones, like estrogen. At least that's what the site talked about. I didn't know much, but I knew that going on estrogen could help. And if I could take it before I went through puberty, I might avoid the worst pain this monster could inflict, the irreversible damages that this monster could inflict upon my body with its puberty. I might even be able to push back. But I also knew these hormones were something only talking to my doctor could give me access to. And so, that was what I thought about the day in my doctor's office as I stared at that box that said transsexual/gender issues. Sounds so cold compared to everything that I've been feeling, though it matched the room. And all I had to do was check the box. Just check it, and maybe I could just talk. Just talk to the doctor. Have a chance to express this feeling. To even let someone know about the monster. And maybe I could begin the structure, the way to avoid that dreaded puberty that I knew was coming, was waiting, was ready to pounce on me. Or at least I could ask about it. And all of that was a checkbox away, a simple pen mark, and then it would be out of my hands. Dr. Jane would come in, would see the mark, and he would ask, and I would have to answer. I would have to say, I checked that box for a reason. It seemed too easy. And then I realized it wasn't. Because the monster began to talk to me again. It reminded me of bullying, the fear of being ostracized further, the feeling of being alone, that I would disappoint my parents, my friends, that they would disown me, that I would be all by myself, and that he and I were one and the same, and I couldn't beat it. And if I checked that box, the doctors and others would see that. And so, I didn't check the box. I put down the survey. That moment through which different crossroads of your life pass through, had come, and I had chosen a path. The doctor came in, did the physical, did everything we needed to do, and I walked home, carrying the weight of that monster and the shame of my fear and the shame of the world around me that had taught me that fear. And the monster laughed. And it was ready to pounce. And pounce it did. Puberty came, and it was hell. I felt my body become even more alien and disgusting to me. Hair started to grow on my face and other places. My shoulders became bigger and more pronounced. My junk became a daily concern. Something that I didn't want to think about at all. The monster seemed like it had finally won. It got to show itself on my outside. It made me like it. The monster was exactly who I didn't want to be. I mean, my fellow classmates also had puberty, and it was no easy feat for them either, but when I spoke to them, or at least I spoke to the boys about it that I was allowed to talk to, they would talk about girls and how excited they were to have their beards started to grow in. Their puberty sucked and were difficult too, but it was at least taking them down a path that excited them. A crossroads that they got to walk that they were excited about. And as I looked at the girls, I knew their puberties were hard too. I'm sure it was very difficult. Not to mention all the crap that girls growing up have to deal with. But I also knew that they got to experience a puberty that they wanted in some ways. Again, I know, not perfect, I know everyone has their own struggles with puberty, but I don't know. I was just looking at them and wish I could have some semblance of that instead of this horrific monster tearing me apart. I wanted what they had and what I was too scared to have asked for. But regardless, the monster kept growing, devouring my inside and outside every day. My voice dropped, hair started to grow on my chest, and yet I powered through it. Hell, I am honestly fucking proud of how much I powered through it. I was top of my damn class. I was involved in so many clubs and activities. I became an Eagle Scout and Boy Scouts. I was the manliest man I could be, despite being very, very nerdy. I did all the things I was supposed to, and I did them fucking well, despite the pain. But I was still fighting it every day. And despite everything, I felt like I was just surviving. My life, despite all the successes, was just survival. It meant nothing in the face of this fight. And so every night, I would take a shower. And I would see my body as it truly was. See how it had changed. And I would spend every shower of my adolescence sitting on the floor of the tub, crying as the water poured down on me. Crying there so my parents wouldn't hear me over the drown of the water splashing down, and the tears would wash away with the rest of the water down the drain. That was my teens. That was my puberty. And it seemed like the monster had won, that I had become the monster. But I hadn't. You see, years later, after college, I came out to some friends, told them this story and others. And despite what the monster had told me, my friends saw that the monster and I were not the same. They saw me and not it. And then, after that, I was lucky enough to find and afford a therapist. I got to go on those hormones that I read about all those years before, and suddenly, for the first time, I got to fight back. And that fight, that second puberty, was not easy, let me tell you. It's just as hard as the first. I sure as hell had dark moments, and I've talked about them before, but this time, I started to win battles instead of lose them. I began to see my body shift from that monster into me. For the first time in a long time. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. I can't tell you how amazing it felt to see me on the outside again. And slowly those nights of crying in the shower began to evaporate like the tears that I had cried so many times. Surgeries and other things helped too, but that second puberty gave me the life I have now. The happiest I have ever been. Today, that monster is mostly gone. Still speaks to me from time to time. Still likes to make itself known, but I don't listen to it all that much anymore. And life isn't just about surviving anymore. It's life. It's pure life. It has its ups and downs, just like anybody's. But I'm so glad it's mine. Finally. But there's still a part of me that still thinks of that day in the doctor's office. I wonder at the path not taken. If I hadn't listened to the monster, if I had just checked that box, would I have avoided some of those irreversible damages to my body? If I had asked? Because you see, that battle with the monster left scars. Some caused by puberty, like my beard that still grows, that I still have to shave off, or shoulders that I feel are a little bit too broad. That's my own, that's the monster whispering to me still to this day. It's not something that's true. But there are other wounds that I inflicted upon myself, both mental and physical. And I wonder if I would have had those nights spent crying in the shower or hiding at the light of my computer at 1 a.m. back for other things that I could have done with that time, those emotions, those feelings, that energy, better things, happier things. I don't know. I can't know what that life would have been like. I've only lived the life that I've lived, and I'm happy where I'm at now. And honestly, that's all I can really ask for. It's more than a lot of other people get. But I do know this. That kid sitting in that doctor's office on that uncomfortable tissue paper, that kid who feels the wrongness about their gender, that kid who implicitly knows the stigma that comes with that feeling, that kid who feels that fear and that anxiety, that kid who is fighting that monster every day, that kid still exists today. Not in here. In fact, it's hundreds of thousands of kids, boys, girls, and MB folks all over the world. As I said before, that monster is not my own, but it's one that many trans people have. And it's something we, today as a society, have the ability to help trans kids fight. For example, one of the biggest ones is a drug called puberty blockers, or at least the colloquial term for them. Safe drugs, for the most part, that with a doctor who has long and honest conversations with these kids, and hopefully parents of these kids, about the risks and their child's feelings, can pause puberties and allow kids the time to wrestle with their feelings and then decide when they're ready and of an age that they can consent to it and fully understand the implications of it, choose which puberty they wish to go with. One that aligns with the gender that they are. Either one that is through their own bodily processes or through hormones, drugs given to them by their doctor. Yet these puberty drugs have been the center of another culture war in our society. One centered on politicizing trans people and trans-affirming care for all trans people, but especially kids, in order to win votes and create another culture clash between two sides. When there are kids in the center of this. And I don't mean to think of the children, that sort of thing, but I'm just annoyed that we are talking about the culture clash, the gender ideology, the transes, rather than actually listening to what kids are feeling, what they're going through. We're so quick to use kids as our weapons in this war, but we don't really listen to them, do we? And we're so quick, because of this culture war, through anti-trans legislation and judicial action, to take away these drugs and these affirming cares for many kids in both the United States and the UK and elsewhere. And it's forcing many of these kids to go through the hell that I went through, forcing them to fight those monsters all by themselves. When we have the chance to help them in that fight, to give them a choice, to allow them to have that moment where they have to choose a path further down the line, to think about that choice instead of being forced down one of them, forced down a path that they don't want to go down. I'm not asking for kids to be given hormone drugs that would cause changes before they're old enough. Even I believe that the young me in my story shouldn't have been given the hormones that I so desperately wanted to get on. What I am asking is that things like puberty blockers or other trans-affirming cares be given to kids instead that are interested, after time has been taken to go over the risks with them and their parents, so that kids don't have to go through any puberty that they don't wish to go through. And then maybe when they're ready, get hormones when they're old enough to really decide that. And by the way, if you're worried about the health effects of puberty blocker drugs, I recommend this excellent video by Mia Mulder, who explores that. It's a great video and I adore it. Or maybe it's not about giving them puberty blockers at all. Some trans kids won't need them. Maybe it's just someone who will listen to them, like a doctor or mental health professional, giving them access to that, who can tell them that the monster and them aren't one and the same. Or for some trans kids who don't have that gender dysphoria monster, but maybe another type of monster, but are still trans nonetheless, just need someone to listen to them, beyond the endless cycle of the culture war. Someone who actually hear what they're saying. So, I hope one day we can create a world where that kid sitting in that doctor's office looking at that checkbox doesn't have to listen to that monster. That instead, they'll feel the safety to check that box and ask a question, and that someone will have the grace to answer it with care and honesty, and maybe give them the tools they need to fight back.
You remind me of the patrons. What patrons? The patrons with the power. What power? The power of helping. Help who? Me do. Do what? Help support me. Look, I tried, folks. Morgan, the Pirate Queen, Joe Herman Hold, Kathleen M. Bath, Ashley Allen, Bo Kiki, O, Miranda Janelle, Ela Bergmas, Alekia Gauch, Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Jam Shin, Joseph Dewey, Randy Thompson, Samuel Howard, Alex Miller, Felicia Toast, Wellington Marcus, Stephen Schuhart, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Barbara Ruski, Kate McKeating, April Struck, Bass, East the Mad, Bush. A Man Chooses, A Slave Obeys, James Krivda, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, Jessica Wright, Mac the Knife, Jared Johnson, Haram Howe, Peter Landers, Fa Rangato, John Steele, Meadow Whisper, William Stewart, Maggie the Goblin, Melinda Walters, Munir Amlani, Ulysses the Pagan, Tony, Jason Knott, Barbara Heelchuck, The Author 13, Here Racist, John Weatherby, Celestial Dawn, Andrew K, Angie Puss, Jetty Indiana Jones, Maeve, Nathan Steele, Lamia, Chloe Dollar, Amanda Comet, Sky Skinner, Sean Piper, Flynn, Lily Tiffany Danger, Beatrix Provis, Janie Packard, Eva Knevia, Geek Filter, Gretchen Badger, Laura Demeraux, Troy Stull, Embers of Eva, Sky Dodo, Strawberry Pup Tart, Eli O'Dare, Pissed and Twisted Garage, Polymena, Din, W. Randy Edie, Sarah Bystam, Jacob Tofar, Keith Briggs, Amelia Loomis, Jessica Chapman, Nikki Gordon Bloomfield, Trevor Machine Berlin, Mountain Harpy, Lysa, Andrew Lamoureux, Sarah Sweeney, Mary Mack, Zone 1 Librarian Burr, Jenny Mabel, Pasty, Michael Hardy, Michael Godey, Philip Hawkins, Andy H., Corey and Vale, honkin' in. Thank you so much to all of you, my lovely patrons, and I hope my terrible singing is recompense for the love and amazingness that you are.